Good morning, everyone. It is 10:30, and we're going to go ahead and open up the Environment and Ag Committee this morning. We have very special guests, former chairs of this committee who now represent the Council of State Government, and they're going to do a presentation for us and get us up to speed on what they've been doing. So if you'd like to come on up and take the seat, we'd love to have your presentation. Don't forget to turn your mic on there. If you don't want to share mics, you could grab that one off the desk. All right, fair enough.
After 16 years, we share it.
Fair enough. All
Longer
right.
than most married couples.
That is probably true. Well, the floor is yours, so take it away. We look forward to it.
Thank you, everyone, for allowing us to come back home. As your chair just said, I'm former Representative Tara Saad from Walpole, New Hampshire, right on the Connecticut River, the prettiest town in the entire world, and the one with more dairy farms than any other town in New Hampshire.
I've heard that for 16 years. I'm Bob Hefner. I'm from Hudson. We both spent 10 years here in the legislature and on this committee, and it was the same 10 years. Tara is a Democrat, I'm a Republican, and we used to swap chairs every term because the majority would change and we'd just swap chairs. But we've gotten along great ever since, and we now work for the Council of State Governments as agriculture policy advisors.
So we actually share the job. It's a job sharing thing, just so that we could continue working together, which is nice. Council of State Governments. I don't know, do all of you know what it is? Have you heard of Council of State Governments? It's similar to NCSL. I don't know if you've heard of that too. It's a membership organization. All the states in the country pay in, the legislatures pay in for the membership dues, and that's what supports us, in exchange for which you get research services, you get socialization with other representatives at conferences and policy summits. We do blogs, we do research, we do newsletters. But what we do mostly is we bring people together with legislators that are on the same committees in other states so that you can meet them, talk to them, and find out what's going on, come up with ideas about what legislation you may want to propose for the next session, and just find out that there's more to legislation than just New Hampshire. There are states all around us that do things differently, but they do it for the same goal. And it's fascinating. It really is. So that's what we do. It is an organization that's been around since 1936 or something like that.
Something like that.
We've been around for a long time. And we are in the eastern region of this national organization, which means we have 11 northeastern states, starting Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, all the way up to all the New England states, 5 eastern Canadian provinces, and 2 territories, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So that's who we serve, and we have the opportunity to go around and visit the state houses of all of these member states, and so that's why we're here. This is coming to our favorite state.
Yeah, we've been doing 11 state houses a year. So we get to travel until COVID hit. And then we've done very little in the way of visiting state houses, although today we're here.
Nice.
Thursday we're in Vermont. It looks like we're going to Massachusetts very shortly, and in May we'll be in Harrisburg at least. So we're getting some of it in. You want to talk about the annual meeting?
I'll talk about the annual meeting, but first I want to talk about some of the things, the policy issues that we've been dealing with lately. The main one that we've been dealing with is the transportation issue with goods because of COVID. You know, the snag of all of the trucks coming through, and what is that is doing to agriculture, and how we can in the future respond better to emergencies in the transportation system like this some things that we can do, most of which seems to be making sure that we, in our region, have a food supply, that we don't need to have things trucked in all the time. There is capacity, and so we are working as a region to try to get that up and running, a regional food system. What other things have we talked about?
We've been talking about carbon farming. We have rural broadband has been a big topic for us. And now we're going to talk about it some more because we've got lots of money coming in from the infrastructure bill. And the objective now is how do you get a hold of that money and be able to use it?
Because this time, for the first time, is going to be in the hands of the states and not in the hands of the FCC, who are going to be doling it out strictly to Comcast or Verizon or whomever, and the last mile never gets covered. And so hopefully we'll be able to figure this out, but we're going to make sure that each state has an infrastructure on how to dole out this money and to whom, and it's a smooth process. So that's interesting. Another thing that we do is the shortage of meat processing facilities in the state. It's getting to the point where you have to wait a year and a half just to get your animals scheduled for slaughter. That does not help local food production. And so until we get either a increase in the number of kill bays in the area, what was it? 30. It's been estimated that we need another 30 kill bays just to handle the demand. In New England, right. And right now, no one is proposing new slaughterhouses because they're so difficult to get up and running. Anyway, enough of what we're doing, but that's the sort of fun stuff that we're dealing with. We do this with webinars, we do this with policy summits, and we do this with our annual meeting. Speaking of which, our annual meeting is actually going to be in Manchester, New Hampshire this year. Normally, we rotate the location of the annual meetings. Last year, well, it would have been in Canada. The last time we met in person, it was in Pennsylvania. Before that, it was in Connecticut. Before that, it was in New York. And so this time, New Hampshire is going to be the host. It's going to be at the Doubletree in Manchester. And I have the information here for you guys. And also talking about what we're going to be dealing with. I left off this sheet that we're going to be talking about climate and the future of farming with global warming and how farming has to change in order to adapt to the different climate.
Yeah, in fact, I'll add to that. Farm Bureau, Howard probably remembers, 3 years ago maybe, had USDA climatologists come in and talk to us about what the change in the climate means to agriculture. And we're going to, we've got an invitation ready to go to it, but we're going to try and bring him back for our annual meeting to talk about what does that mean, and if we do need, how do we adapt if we need to? So we'll see what happens with that. And
what?
And you can add the next one.
What? I was distracted, sorry.
Oh, we're also we're also doing rural broadband.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, we just discussed that. This focus is going to be on the money end of it. And it's very interesting because in the past, like I said before, the large providers were the ones who would get the money from, like the USDA and the FCC and all of that for rural broadband. This time, the money is being given to the Commerce Department in Washington, who's going to give it directly to the states. And it's like the providers, so used to getting the money, are not happy about that. So we're going to have a nice discussion, including them, to talk about their position, like why they deserve to have the money. And then we're going to be talking to municipalities and cities saying, this is why we need the money. So it's going to be fun.
Another thing that we normally do at our meetings and will this year, we have 3 work sessions. The first one is always a roundtable of states and provinces. We go around and get all 18 jurisdictions that we're responsible for, and they give us a 3-minute update on what's going on in their state, what are the important things that they're working on, and what are the big issues they have. And then we follow that with one of the CSG people who's down in Washington, comes in and he talks about everything agriculture that's happening in Washington.
Oh, speaking of which, this coming year is going to be the Farm Bill. They're going to be voting on a new Farm Bill, and that is so important to every aspect of our lives. All the food services like school meals, school breakfast, school lunches, things like that, SNAP benefits, all of those are covered by the Farm Bill. You're talking trillions of dollars that is going to be decided in the Farm Bill. And if it's got, I think, 10 titles, 11 titles, something like that, underneath this one mega bill, dealing with conservation, dealing with commodity prices. It's so huge. But if we in the Northeast don't work together to actually come up with what we want in this Farm Bill, we won't get any recognition because each of our states is small. Like if New Hampshire goes into Washington and says, you know, we would like some money for specialty crops, they would laugh us out of the room because we're so small. But if we as a whole group go in with New York, Pennsylvania, all of the New England states, and Maryland and Delaware, they'll think twice about, you know, laughing us out of the room because we have more representation.
Yeah, to that point, if you take our congressional delegation from the 11 northeastern states, we're 21% of Congress. So working together, we have some clout. Not working together, we have none. Yeah, who's going to listen to 2 reps from New Hampshire? But when you put us all together, we've got a lot of clout.
So in the annual meeting, in addition to discussing these things, we come up with resolutions that actually get sent on to Congress telling what we want. Last year, we came up with a resolution requiring truth in labeling. So if something is saying it's soy milk and it's not from a lactating animal, then it's not milk. And no one is enforcing that actual rule. People continue to use the word milk when they shouldn't be. And so we were sort of demanding that they enforce this rule because that's what the definition is. Speaking of labeling, I just saw this morning. I thought it was hilarious, so I wanted to share it with you guys. It's about fake eggs, so anyway.
And while she's doing that, the last time we did a Farm Bill, which was 5 years ago, we also came up with a resolution for the Northeast of what we wanted to see in the Farm Bill. And to make sure Congress got it, Tara and I went to a hearing on the Farm Bill that the House Ag Committee in Washington put on, except they were at SUNY Cobleskill. So we went over there, sat through their hearing. We spoke at the hearing, and we gave them a resolution, so they all had a copy.
So that you're just reading, I think, is hilarious. A friend of mine who is a sheep farmer out of Surrey, New Hampshire, actually wrote this comment in response to an advertisement that the Keene Co-op actually put in their advertisement. And he's not enamored of the product, I don't think. But anyway. So that's the sort of thing we do. What I want to do is find out what you guys have been doing this year. I'm always curious as to what E&A has before it. I understand that you have some solid waste issues, some pet issues. They sound familiar to me because we've dealt with them all before in the past. So Mr. Chair, do you want to maybe give us a quick rundown of the things that have been sailing through and things that have been maybe not so sailing through this year?
Certainly. Well, I want to thank you for the presentation. Actually, can I ask you a question first?
Of course.
On the
Yes,
CSG East Annual Meeting.
yes,
So it says August 12th through 14th.
yes.
But the 15th and 16th are the actual meetings. So is it actually the 12th through the 16th?
That was a mistake, a typographical error on my part. Disregard that as 15th and 16th.
So it's not 12 through 14, it's 15 and 16?
15, 16. Yes,
Gotcha.
thank you
All right.
very much.
No problem. I was trying to make sure I was understanding what I was reading.
It does start a little earlier than that, and the 12th may be a good number, because we have an executive committee
That's why.
meeting and an opening dinner on Sunday, and so we start early.
Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough. So on our committee, I think you've actually kind of highlighted what we've done is solid waste and a few animal issues. That's been primarily what we've done. We have had a couple of other bills relating to state fairs and setting up a grant funding for the state fairs for some capital issues that they may have. In fact, that's in the Senate now.
That's great, good. I saw that there was something on soil. What happened to that? And what
We
was that
did-
about?
Actually, Representative Bixby might want to cover that. It was
Sure.
his bill.
Yeah,
So it's a study committee bill on the soil condition. Well, actually, there are two bills. One was last year. There was a bill that updates the soil statutes to include the definitions of healthy soil and essentially it set things up in the soil statutes so that. Or in the soil conservation statute, so that the conservation districts, which are already doing a lot of stuff with healthy soil,
yes, yeah.
can include the charge in the statute to deal with healthy soil when they're filling out grant applications, and the idea is that will strengthen their hand in the granting process,
Right.
because it is then part of their mission.
Right,
So that's what that one was about.
smart.
And then this year, there is a study committee which will be heard by the Senate at some point, but I don't see why they would turn it down. We only put one senator on it. But that is looking at the soil conditioner chapter, because when Howard and I were doing a bill last year, actually the healthy soil statute, there was a last-minute amendment that the Senate brought in that would make plant biostimulants a different category, and that went into the soil conditioner statute. And when we started looking at that chapter, we realized, well, there's no definition of a soil conditioner for one thing, and there are a few other recognizable shortcomings of it, and it hasn't been really studied for a couple decades. So
Right.
we thought, okay, time to
Good.
kind of do with this what we did with the slaughter statute
Exactly.
3 or 4 terms
exactly.
ago.
Yeah, we did solid waste too, the same way. We studied
Yeah.
it and studied it and came
Yeah.
up with revisions to make it
Yeah.
make sense.
So that's what the soil
Good,
bills
thank you.
are. And we had a study committee last fall on slaughter facilities, and we came to the unfortunate conclusion that this is a very real problem, and it has several significant factors leading into it. But there's not much we can do as a legislature to mitigate those, such as a lack of workforce and
Right.
basically there need to be private individuals who are going to come forward and start and make the slaughter facilities.
Right.
And we
Right.
can't legislate that.
We've spent, 2 years when we were trying to get a state meat inspection program up and running in the state so that we would have control and not the USDA food safety,
Yeah.
which currently is, and that was shot down in
Well,
Washington.
We looked at that. We looked at this doing a state program again,
Yeah.
and came to the conclusion that it is not financially viable for a state the size of New Hampshire to be doing
I
that.
remember that we thought the same with Vermont. They started it out first. They have a state meat inspection program. Their department alone for the state meat inspection program, I think, had 14 full-time employees. And we were thinking, in New Hampshire, we were going to pass that. But actually, that department is self-funding from all the licenses and everything. And so it doesn't really cost the state anything to run it. And yet they now have the ability to use their own people to inspect their processing facilities. And they're even getting agreements so that they can sell these state meat inspection meat across state lines, which is even better. I mean, it would be good, but whether it's going to happen here or not, I don't know. But anyway. What else, Howard?
So we did finally get the raw milk ice cream bill through, signed,
Nice.
and it is now law.
Good for
And,
you.
So that one is finally done.
Is that retail?
Yes, but
Ooh.
there's, they'll allow them to make raw milk ice cream and sell it. There's a few stipulations we put on for, warnings and things of that nature.
Disclaimer, okay,
Yeah,
good, good,
disclaimer,
good,
and
good.
there's package sizing, I think it was
Right.
6 ounce max, if I remember right, so
Right.
that it would be considered individual servicing. But,
Have there been
sizes.
any unfortunate incidents of like salmonella or anything with raw milk that you know of over the last few years?
There was a small one that occurred, you remember where it was? I can't recall where it
Yeah.
was.
Okay, so Brandmore Farm in Rollinsford
Rollinsford, yep.
had one heifer who had I forget exactly what it might have been chlamydia or
Okay.
listeria, or
Right.
there was some bacterial problem with one of their heifers, and they did not catch it immediately. And then they had a few customers saying, I got sick, and they immediately sent out a recall notice
Right.
and basically did everything you're supposed to do that
Good.
to mitigate the situation.
Good.
So they decided that they thought they had the impression that they were doing all the controls necessary that they needed, and that this had slipped through. So they've
Right.
decided not to do raw milk anymore. But one of the things that the food safety division got all gun shy about raw milk.
Of course they
because of
did.
this.
They tend
But
to, yes.
what this actually demonstrated was what they told us in committee several years previously, which is that if it is a small, if it is a small operation,
Right.
and it's reasonably well traceable,
Right.
then you're just balancing risks.
Exactly.
And what happened here was that that basically went into effect. There was an incident, and
Right.
it's a known risk, and they dealt with it really appropriately.
Right.
And a few people got sick, but it was not like a massive thing all over the state or the country.
Do you still have it so that it is only saleable at the farm stand, or farmer's market?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
We didn't change that, and we just added basically ice cream to the existing statute.
Good, good, yeah.
Probably one other major thing that we did was, this year we had a bill come through, it's in the Senate now, setting the maximum contaminant levels for PFCs in soil, because that is related to the St. Gobain issue, and there was some resulting soil contamination that occurred. As far as I know, it came from airbound sources. And so we are working on that and recognizing that it was an issue, and so
Right.
we've finally set some things in place so that DES would have something to work with. And again, it's working its way through the Senate now.
How does that impact farms, or does it?
So the only concern that I had with it potentially could be like land spread sludge, things of that nature
yeah,
that
yeah,
could
yeah.
potentially
Right.
contain PFCs, as we saw in Maine that occurred. And
Okay.
so that was really the area that I saw it potentially could,
Okay.
but otherwise I don't think it will.
Is sludge still a successful operation here in New Hampshire?
It's still generally used, yes,
Yeah, okay,
amongst, typically it's dairy farmers who are using it on field corn.
Yes, exactly,
Because
exactly.
it's not allowable on vegetable land
Right,
as well,
right.
anything that's going to touch the ground, any
Right.
crop, so.
Right,
That-
good.
That's certainly the largest use of it, most definitely. Beyond that, most of the other issues we've had were related to solid waste, and we had several bills before the committee this year on that. And
Yeah.
we put out sort of a major encompassing study committee bill that's going to look at several issues related to the siting of landfills
Right.
and the associated risks and things
Right.
that go with it.
When we were in, because of the Casella problem in Bethlehem, we came up with a bill that would have required a host community agreement before any expansion, huge expansion to the existing landfill or siting of a new one. The community themselves had to agree to it with the company coming in. That unfortunately didn't pass. But I thought you need to have the community buy into this, you know, and you have to be sort of working together instead of just being foisted upon and both sides being angry. That's what it seems to be. So,
Well, certainly all of these issues are still there. They're still very much a forefront, and we've
Right.
had, you know, a lot of concerned citizens that have come in and testified before the committee, and
Right.
I think the committee has really enjoyed a good amount of information from the industry professionals as well as the
Right.
impacted citizens within the community. So it's been a good experience for us to have that information.
So I was just testifying in the Senate on the bill that we passed out of our committee and passed on a voice vote in the House.
is that 1454?
1454,
Yeah, I have
which basically it's very simple. There's an existing setback of 200 feet, and we said that setback should actually be determined with hydrogeological data, and there should be a 5-year window between when any spill would happen and when contaminated groundwater would reach a sensitive water body, and that it seems to be a very nicely targeted,
Good.
change to current rule.
Good.
So we've got about 2 more minutes here.
sorry.
If there's one more, anything else that you want to wrap up with before we move into our hearings?
Well, I'll leave it with, we still would like to see some of you come to our annual meeting. After all, it is in your state. Howard is your appointed representative to our committee at CSG. If he can make it, we'd love to have him. If he can't, maybe he can appoint someone to go in his stead.
But anybody can go.
Yes. The problem is there's a cost to that, and I have no idea what the speaker has for a budget this year. So,
And we're trying to work with our organization to at least give a huge discount to the representatives in the state.
Certainly.
And we need volunteers to help people at the registration desk and everything. So if you want to volunteer in a little position, then you get to come to the meeting. So,
That's a good pitch right there.
yeah.
Well, listen, we want to thank you both.
yeah, and it really is a great idea when you go to those, because the networking with your counterparts in other states is great.
Oh,
Thanks.
you. We appreciate you coming in, and I'll certainly try, and it is a busy season for me on the farm, and the mornings are a challenge, but I will certainly try.
But you don't have to travel far.
That
so
is
it's
true.
a good thing.
That is very true.
Thank you so
All
much
right.
for allowing us to come and come back home.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Oh, absolutely. So we've got about 1 minute before we're going to gavel in with the next bill. Anyone who wants to speak on it, I would ask you to send a pink card up in this direction so that we can get you on the list. Thank you. All right, so it's 11 o'clock. We're going to open up the hearing on Senate Bill 396, which is relative to solid waste management, and I'm going to call on Senator Kavanaugh to introduce the bill. Good morning, Senator, and welcome to Environment NAG.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, and committee members. Hopefully we'll be quick here. We can get out and enjoy some sun today. My name is Kevin Kavanaugh. I'm Senator from District 16, representing the towns of Bow, Candia, Dunbarton, Hooksett, and Manchester Wards 1, 2, and 12. I'm here as a prime sponsor of Senate Bill 396, legislation that requires the Department of Environmental Services to contract with an engineer or hydrogeologist when evaluating a permit for a landfill. When this issue was brought forward last year, we had outstanding questions regarding the science behind the policy. When I was placed on the committee of conference, I made a commitment to bring forward legislation this session that would help move forward on this critical issue. Our state parks are one of the most significant public assets we have, and we should take responsible steps to protect the natural beauty that New Hampshire is known for. But that also recognizes the skyrocketing cost of recycling expenses. Understanding that, at times, the Department of Environmental Services has limited access to the necessary resources needed to conduct the kind of analysis outlined in this bill. This legislation puts the cost on the applicant for the department to retain an independent licensed professional engineer or hydrogeologist to assist in determining what information is necessary to render the application technically complete, assessing whether the application meets the requirements for approval, and ensuring that the department processes the application in a timely manner. This helps to ensure that a thorough process when making a determination about where to site these landfills. I am not sitting here today as an expert. I am sitting here as a legislator, hoping to give the experts the tools they need in order to make informed decisions in the best interest of both the environment and the people of New Hampshire. Thank you. I'll answer any questions I can, but there's hopefully some great experts in this field behind me.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have any questions for Senator Kavanaugh? Representative Bixby.
Yes, so I happen to be in the hearing for a House bill that requires a hydrogeologist to do test well samples around a prospective landfill site. Is that the sort of thing that this bill could help with?
That's exactly what we were. Last year we had it was kind of an arbitrary number of 2 miles in a broad section of area. And this really gives it to the experts in environmental science the chance to look at that area and tell us where it should be or where it shouldn't be.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Comtois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. In reading this bill, I'm looking at the department may enter into a written agreement. And then it says if the applicant's failure to enter in such agreement may be grounds to deny the application. There's a lot of ifs in this. How do we know, how does the applicant know if they choose not to, that their application won't be denied? Because it doesn't say they shall, it says that they may. And how do we know what the expense will be to the applicant?
Thank you for the question. And I did work with the department on that because originally I had in there, I said had shall, and they thought it would be easier for the department if they did have the resources that they can say may, and that's why it was changed to may. The price, again, would have to find out from experts in the field what that would be. I would have no idea what that price would be until we probably get a quote from someone from the department or an engineer. Thank you.
Any further questions for Senator Kavanaugh? Seeing none, we thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on Senate Bill 396? I don't have any more pink cards. All right, seeing none. The blue sheet, we have 3 people signed in support. Online, we have 35 signed in support and 1 opposed. And with that, we will close the hearing and on Senate Bill 396, and our next hearing will start in 15 minutes on Senate Bill 387. Okay, seeing as it is now 11:20, we're going to open up the hearing on Senate Bill 367, and I'll call on Senator Kevin Avard to introduce the bill. Welcome to Environment and Ag.
Thank you, Representative, Mr. Chair. Really appreciate it. It's nice to see friendly faces, people smiling. Happy day.
We're always happy in E&A.
Yes.
It's a great committee.
It is a great committee. And worthy of all the praise that you put in it and a lot of work. We know that. And so, anyway, for the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, and I am the prime sponsor of this bill, SB 367, relative to regulatory status, advanced recycling and manufacturing facilities. I appear before you to introduce 367 relative to the regulatory status, advanced recycling and manufacturing facilities. When this bill was brought before me, I was glad to prime sponsor it, and I think that we have a lot of bipartisan support for this, and I'm thankful for all those who did co-sponsor with me. The bill is about incentivizing private investment to come to New Hampshire and develop another tool for keeping plastic out of the landfills. I was really excited to hear that there is an alternative. We have people that are interested in looking at New Hampshire, so we want to make sure that these plastics are out of the landfills and creating an advanced recycling facility. There are others here who are going to speak to the specifics of the industry and how the advanced recycling works. The goal of the bill is very simple. It is to establish a clear regulatory path that this type of recycling facility is treated as a manufacturing facility and not a solid waste facility. 18 other states have passed similar laws with the intent to attract private investment to the states that would bring good jobs in STEM fields and construction, as well as other ways to recycle the hard-to-handle plastics. There are no other such facilities in the Northeast, and we should want this type of manufacturing definitely in New Hampshire. SB 367 passed the Senate unanimously on a bipartisan voice vote. We did amend the bill to address questions brought forward by the Department of Environmental Services about their authority, and the department was involved in drafting the amendment and support this bill. I'm pretty sure they still do. And my goal is to pass this enabling legislation to help New Hampshire. It can help with our solid waste needs by diverting the hard-to-recycle plastics from our landfills. It can help recycle and reuse the plastics and help our economy by bringing good manufacturing jobs in STEM fields. It's a win-win for New Hampshire. We labored hard on this bill, and when I thought, well, there are plastics, as you know, that go into the landfill that will never be recycled. They will never be recycled. They're there, and they're causing harm. This is an idea that will take that stuff from the landfills or prevent it from going into the landfills, which have a lifespan in itself, and recycle it and reuse it. A lot of people, aren't familiar with what's going on with the landfills and the lifespan of those landfills. And of course, when you continually dump plastics that are not recyclable into them, they just create a situation where the lifespan of that landfill will diminish. We come up with good ideas. And one of the things that troubles me is that when we come up with a good idea, we get legislators later on that didn't think they were a good idea, and we tend to pull the rug out from underneath these good ideas. And I think, like the bioplants, is a similar situation. The thinking outside the box got me really excited about this bill. It really is an idea that its time has come to pass, and I think this is I just hope that you see it the same way that I do, that we have an opportunity to preserve our landfills and to protect our environment with this type of legislation. So with that, I'll take any questions, but if you have any real technical questions, I think the department is here that can answer those as well. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I'll open up with one. Did you work with DES on drafting the new language for this bill?
Yes.
So you've addressed, I know they're going to speak, but you're comfortable with?
Indirectly, yes, I did.
Yeah, so you're comfortable with the language changes and their recommendations?
Very much, and we hope that you are too.
Thank you. Representative Kaplan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question, Senator. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm glad you share a similar concern with reducing the plastic from the waste stream in New Hampshire. That's a great, laudable aim.
Representative, could you get closer to your mic?
Yeah, sorry about that.
I'm reading your
Are
lips
you-
at this point.
Are you familiar with the reduce, reuse, recycle paradigm for solving waste issues?
In passing, yes, I'm not, but I've heard something similar to that.
Where would a plant of this type fit into that paradigm?
In New Hampshire?
Anywhere?
Yeah, I,
Because we don't have one in New Hampshire, so.
well,
it's
up
theoretical.
in our whole area, we don't have anything that supports us, so this is an idea that we need something in the region that would support this.
Well, I mean, to solve the waste crisis, however, where would it fit in the paradigm of reduce, reuse, recycle? Because the idea is that reduction is the number one aim.
It's important, but
So-
it would be in the recycling area. This is
So it's the
specifically.
third one down, it's the lowest one down.
I guess if you want to categorize it that
Well,
way,
that's
it's
how it's
still part of the paradigm, right?
Okay.
So it doesn't work without it.
Right.
Yeah.
But in terms of solving the waste crisis, we always try to reduce before we.
We want to reduce, that's right, but there are plastics that nobody knows how to recycle at this point, and to be able to reuse and recycle, that's part of it.
Right.
Thank you, Representative.
Okay. Yep.
Any other questions for the Senator? Representative Bixby.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. So let me say at the outset that I like the concept of being able to really recycle things that are not or as easily recycled as the a couple of types of bottle plastic. But I just have some questions about the language of the bill. Let's see, first page at line 15, for the purposes of the chapter, advanced recycling facilities shall not be considered facilities. Solid waste facilities, solid waste management facilities. I'm not quite sure why just plain facilities would be there. Is that something to do with the way things are written in current rule?
So shall not be considered facilities, and then comma, solid waste facilities?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's don't really know.
Okay.
Yeah, and if that might be a redundancy or something to that effect, maybe that could be struck, but I'm not sure. but
Okay,
maybe-
so maybe that's something I should bring up with
Yeah.
someone from the department. The next question, the next thing is at line 23. It's in the bold italics. Products
Yep.
derived from advanced recycling shall not be considered waste-derived products or require certification as waste-derived products. Why is that line there?
I think part of the discussion that we had is that this is a manufacturing bill. This is for those products that pertain to manufacturing, and they're considered products it's not refuge, it's basically, I'm trying to think of the word,
Secondary raw material?
raw material, thank you very much. It's raw material, and I think that the idea that this is going to end up being part of a waste management, that's not what this is. This is for specifically recycling things that would end up in waste management. Instead, it goes towards recycling.
Okay.
So it's, we want recycling. We don't have it in New Hampshire.
Okay, follow up? Yes. So, one of the things, so we have the way, I'm sure you're familiar with our waste management pyramid that has, basically landfilling at the bottom and reusing at the top, or not making at the top, not having it waste in the first place at the top, and somewhere in the middle of that is recycling and
Reuse.
So this would be specifically recycling, not reuse. There are two different categories, but we're not. I don't want to quibble about that. What I want to, my question is actually about. So the current waste management plan has waste reduction and diversion goals, and I assume that the next one is going to have those as well. And I'm wondering whether material that is diverted from the waste stream for this purpose would still be considered diverted from the waste stream and count towards our ability to get, keep things out of landfills, with this line in here about it not being considered waste.
I'll let the other people speak to that specific part of the bill, but I do believe that what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of plastics that go into the landfill that cannot be recycled. This is thinking outside the box. And there'll be a reduction, at least from New Hampshire, of the plastics that are going into the landfills. So we have some experts to talk about whether there's a byproduct or something to that effect that will, I think, will address some of your concerns there.
Right. So I just to clarify,
another follow-up?
I'm not saying that it, I just want to make sure that when we use this process to avoid putting plastics into landfills, we're getting credit for it.
Oh, we're going to get credit for it,
Okay.
of course.
Okay.
This is a big feather in
And
New
I just
Hampshire's
don't want to
hat.
have an inadvertent piece of language sort of preventing that. Okay, so.
Did you have more you wanted to ask?
I think the rest of my questions may be better directed to someone further down the line.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Representative Bixby.
Any further questions for Senator Abar?
Mr. Chair, there was one over there on the right.
Sorry. Representative Murray, I couldn't see you.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for taking my question. So, and this may or may not be something that you are able to answer, but I was curious with regards to on line 4, starting, page 3, lines 4 through 13, roughly thereof. When it's defining solid waste, there is reference to potential burial locations within 75 feet of any drinking water supply. And I was curious as to how that might jive with some of the other things we're considering elsewhere with respect to the 75 feet. And additionally, whether or not there is an intent to bury anything, why that statute is in there.
I'm going to let the department handle that one, if that's okay.
Fair.
Yeah, they're pretty reverse to the technical parts. I think
Thank
there was
you.
another one over here. Mr. Chair.
Yep, I have Representative Stapleton first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I don't see anything in the bill here about incineration or high heat destruction. This sounds like an industrial process, what you're forwarding in the bill for breaking down and reutilization of these components. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Representative Dutsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. In the beginning, you said you were asked to bring this bill forward. Can you tell us who asked you to bring the bill forward?
I could, Jody Grimbles brought it to my attention, and she represents.
Who was that?
Jody Grimbles. She is one of the lobbyists here.
Okay.
she
and
brought it to my
her
attention that-
organization?
I beg your pardon?
Her organization?
Jody?
I'm not familiar with the organization. Okay, so it was the American Chemistry
Yeah.
Council that asked you to, okay.
Jody, thank you. All right.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
There was another question?
Any further questions? Representative Kaplan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my follow-on question. Is it fair to say that this is a fairly new industrial process?
I think there's some other states that have adopted it.
Adopted the regulation or the actual industrial process?
Both.
Okay, so how many plants are in existence?
My numbers, I thought I understood that there were at least 6 or 9.
Okay, so
I'm gonna
it's
get
fair to
the-
say it's not a widespread industrial process
No,
in
we're going to
North
be the
America.
leader on that.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, that's great. I have no problem with being the leader in industrial processes that work. But it's not really a tested
Oh, I think it
system. It's been tested in the lab, but it's not been tested at a commercial scale.
I believe it has.
It
I
has,
think
okay.
you'll hear testimony that it has.
Okay. Were you concerned at all at some of the potential downside of the byproducts of a chemical and industrial process when
I
you're looking
think
at
with
this?
any manufacturing, there's always a downside. Whether you're a tool and die, there's a downside. You know, there's any type of manufacturing you have, there's always a downside. There's always a byproduct of something. However, what we have right now is a byproduct going into the landfills that will never come out. And we have no solution. And we have a bunch of fear about moving forward, and it's time we step out of that fear and move forward with ideas that can protect our environment. We have that byproduct already. We already have that downside in play, and it's been in play for multiple generations. It's time. It's time we come up with an idea that, hey, we got a plan. Is there a perfect plan? There's always a downside to every plan. This is thinking outside the box. This is a way to say, hey, look, there's a byproduct there's a downside that's already being generated after generation, and it's going into the landfills. And we can second guess it, but all we're doing is, with this particular bill, enabling the conversation to go forward. This does not license any particular plant at this point, but this allows the conversation to go forward. Can we fix it? Yeah. Are there downsides? Tell me a bill that doesn't have a downside. Tell me a manufacturing company that is 100% all, I just drove to New Jersey. Is there a downside? There may be, but I'm not aware of any. But what we're doing right now, we're only setting the stage for the conversation to continue, and to, instead of saying no, 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 hey, let's figure out a plan and work together. And this had bipartisan support in the Senate, which in itself, I'll just let you know, that's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Bixby.
Yeah, just one more question, which is, why is a redefinition of the plastics feedstock for this as not solid waste, or why, actually, let me phrase it this, why is it an impediment to have it labeled as solid waste?
I think it changes the narrative of what's going on, and it seems as though narratives are a good way to kill things, good ideas. And so it isn't. It's basically raw material that is being used. If it's not labeled as raw material, then guess what? It goes into the landfill in the region. So we can quibble about that part of it, Representative, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's already going into the landfills. It's not longer going to China anymore. They stopped that. It's going into the landfills all over the place. And there's no plan. This is a plan.
So
One
I
follow-up,
guess,
yep.
let me just narrow down the question a little bit.
Sure.
Is there something about the fact that it is currently considered solid waste that would prevent a company from using it as a raw material?
Again, I'm going to go right back to what I just said.
Now, this is a purely regulatory question. Maybe I should ask.
Yeah, maybe you
DES
should
about it.
ask them.
Okay.
Because I'm a little defensive on that, because what I'm afraid of is that there are people that like to change definitions, and definitions mean everything. Semantics are the atom bomb of persuasion. I learned that in high school.
All right,
So
we'll save that
change
one
out
for
the-
DES then.
Yeah.
All right, Representative Murray,
thanks.
you have one final question?
Yeah, I think I'll wait for DES as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. Wait a minute, we have one. You almost got away. Representative Comtois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator. Is it possible for me to get a copy of your written testimony?
Of my written testimony, I don't have a written one. I'm all verbal. Oh, yeah, maybe I do. Yeah, sure. You can have that.
Okay, thank
I'm all
you.
verbiage. And this is such a nice committee. I really appreciate the questions and friendly faces.
We appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, with that, I will pull up Mark Sanborn from DES, and we'll let him answer hopefully some of the questions that the committee has. Thank you, sir. Welcome to ENA.
Good morning. For the record, Mark Sanborn, Assistant Commissioner, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And let me start out by disappointing you that I will not be able to answer a lot of the technical questions you folks have. We really would need Mike Wimsatt and the folks from the division to answer some of the more technical questions. I can speak to the work we've done in terms of drafting the bill and the fact that we feel extremely comfortable with the access issue and authority to review. So happy to address those. I'll just make a couple remarks and then answer any questions involving that. So myself and Mike Winsat did assist with the early drafts of the bill, and we've been working with the folks the whole way. There was a concern about our ability to address any public health concerns at the facility and access to the facility. We worked with the folks who drafted the bill for an amendment that was passed in the Senate, and we feel very comfortable with the language that is in that amendment, that we would have no concerns about accessing any concerns at a facility to address any concerns and verify any public threats, et cetera. So we have no concerns with this taking away any authority to perform our regulatory responsibilities. Quite the opposite. We feel the language in here, it reinforces that authority when it comes to the subjects being addressed in the bill.
All right, thank you. I'll start with Representative Kaplan, since I saw his hand first. But I'll ask you, Representative, pull your mic a little closer. Or, there you go. You got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I'm curious, if maybe you can help me out here. I was looking at the original bill that was proposed to the Senate, and the DES amendment that went into that bill, the original one, seemed to be a lot stronger than what we see before us here today. So I was just like, could I read you what was in there before?
Please.
It said, the department may enter and inspect to determine, oh no, this is the new one. So what you have originally is the department shall regulate advanced recycling facilities as manufacturing facilities. Advanced recycling facilities and the products and byproducts shall comply with applicable rules and regulations that apply to manufacturing facilities, their operations, products, and byproducts. And this is the kicker. The department may make inspections to ensure compliance, which I thought was perfectly appropriate. It's exactly what the state requires, what we require for your department to do its due diligence to protect public health and the environment. The state, reserves the right to go in and ensure compliance with all regulations. What we have now seems laughably toothless in comparison. And, let me just read it to you. The department may enter and inspect to determine whether storage of materials prior to advanced recycling is a nuisance or poses a threat to the environment. The department may utilize its enforcement authority to require abatement of the nuisance or threat. Is that what we're really concerned about here? It's like, I can imagine an ExxonMobil or a Chevron coming in here and building one of these plants. They probably have some fairly well worked out storage capacity. Are we really concerned about the nuisance of the storage of the bottles and not the impacts on the air or the groundwater or the land use of the products and byproducts? It seems, why my question specifically is, why have we walked back that enforcement authority in the language that we see before us here?
Appreciate the question. Certainly, the tone of the two passages, different versions you read, there's clearly a difference in tone, but I think in actual authority, we feel very comfortable that the new language gives us the same ability to address any any identified concerns to public health that the other language. I won't disagree. The original one was written stronger, but I can confirm on behalf of the department and Mike Wimsatt and the entire division that we do not think we are giving away any of our authority. We still have the ability to inspect, and we're very comfortable that we haven't walked away from any of our regulatory authority with the new language. Again, agreed, tone is a little different, but that doesn't matter to us in terms of our ability to perform our regulatory responsibilities.
Representative Bixby.
Yes, I'd just like to follow up on that point a little bit. So it sounds like from what Representative Kaplan read in the original bill, it sounded like requiring compliance was something that would encompass things like emissions from smokestacks and sort of the effects of the facility on the surrounding area. And it sounds like the current language is purely a matter of managing the solid waste product, which is no longer called a solid waste product, to make sure that it meets the conditions that are required for solid waste products. Is there something in here that does protect the surrounding air and land and water quality?
Sure, all the existing statutes that gives us the regulatory authority to ensure that, we already have those authorities and in state statutes. So if there's a stack there, they would be required to obtain the necessary permits. I mean, we don't have to reiterate. This bill is about a specific new approach, and so that's why we're comfortable with the language in here, reiterating our authority as it comes to what's being addressed in this bill. It doesn't change all the existing statute and rules that give us the authority to regulate the air and the other items you mentioned.
Follow up?
Yes, so just to follow up, by changing the definition to manufacturing as opposed to solid waste, it will still fall under all of the state's regulatory authority for manufacturing facilities that would include things like preventing air and water pollution.
The activities you discussed that could take place at a facility that are subject to existing statute and regulations would continue to be so.
Okay.
One more.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question that the senator felt that you might be more appropriate to cover, which is if we define these plastics, the feedstock plastics, as not solid waste, how do they get counted in the state's solid waste diversion goals under the solid waste plan?
So that's a little more technical a question than I can offer, but I can commit to the committee that we will follow up in writing with the answer to any specific technical questions as it relates to this.
Okay, and
Yeah, go
this
ahead.
is a very short one.
Yep.
Would someone, if we were to do a subcommittee on this, would someone from the department be able to?
Yeah,
come and
I
help
heard
us?
there might be a working session, and Mike Wimsatt will be here for that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Murray.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. With regard to the new paragraph that is developed on page 2, line 8, it's paragraph, I think, 5. It sets a set of criteria for these plastics that need to be met, and I'm assuming that all of A through E must be met, but it just says which all of the following apply. So in my reading then of subsection D, where it says the plastic has been sorted from solid waste and other regulated waste, but may contain residual amounts of solid waste such as organic material and incidental contaminants or impurities such as paper labels and metal rings. Is there a contaminant percentage? Much of what we had seen in our recycling and solid waste study committees around plastics recycling regarded contamination. So when we're talking about the reason for things being refused from recycling facilities, it was due to contamination. So I'm curious to know if there's a number or a percentage that if this plastic comes contaminated, what's that metric there?
That is a great question for me to get back to you on.
Thank you.
All right, I'll remind committee members to shut their mics off when they're done asking questions, because we can only have so many on at a time. Representative Dutsey.
Thank you for taking my question. So my understanding in attending some webinars on this subject is that there's a lot of omission. There's two things that go into it. First of all, it's a highly intensive energy source. So in other words, a lot of energy needs to go into it in order to get the feedstock out. That's number one. And the second thing is that there's a lot of toxins that go into the air through this process. Since it's would be a new process in the state, do we have any, how would we regulate the amount of emissions that go into the air? Do we have any standards for that? Who would set up those standards if we don't have them? Can you give me any background on that?
Well, so my understanding as it relates to the any air emission pieces to this is they'd be held to the existing air emissions standards we have. So again, that's why we're comfortable with the language in here is that doesn't impact all of our existing regulatory and statutory authority and the standards that already exist. So I can't give you the spell out the numerically the standards, but I mean, they exist in state statute, and again, happy to follow up with specifically those standards if that be of interest.
Okay, Rep. Stapleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I noticed the process is described in the bill. Talk about deprivation of oxygen. So it's a high heat melt factor instead of an incineration because you want to preserve the material for feedstock. So I would assume that that means that the release to atmosphere is minimal, if at all. It's contained. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Follow up? I noticed that on page 2, down at the very bottom of the bill, at Roman 8B, sub B, materials for which the United States Environmental Protection Agency has made a non-waste determination pursuant 40 CFR 241, or has otherwise determined are feedstocks and are not solid waste. Followed up on the next page, page 3 at the top at sub D, recovered feedstock is not mixed with solid waste or hazardous waste on site or during processing at an advanced recycling facility. And finally, at Roman 22, the definition of solid waste is pretty clear that these become distinct and separate type of materials. Is that not clear language for what we're describing here? I'd be comfortable with it.
All I can say is, Director Wimsatt and all the folks at DES were all very comfortable with the way it's spelled out as you laid it out.
Yeah, thank you.
Representative Kaplan.
Thanks for taking my question. I just have a question about regulation of manufacturing facilities versus solid waste facilities. I know for solid waste facilities that you have, the DES has the right, and not the right, but it's part of the plan that you go in once a year and you actually measure the smokestack emissions, for instance, or you contract out with somebody to do that for you, but that's part of the plan. They go in and do that. If for a manufacturing facility, is it the same thing where the DES goes in and measures themselves the emissions, or is this a matter of self-reporting more from the industrial facilities?
I mean, you're using the term manufacturing generically. It depends, and I mean, that's not criticism. I'm just saying.
Well, that's how it's stated here.
Yeah,
it is very generic.
Yeah, so what we would be regulated would be determined by what permits they received to operate at the facility. So, if a manufacturer would, propose plans to develop a facility, we'd let them know what permits would be required for that, and then depending on what activities and what technologies they're using, and then we would, based on whatever permit or permits were received, the regulatory follow-up would be dependent on what those permits were.
So basically, we have no idea. The regulatory framework here, it seems like a work in progress, to be honest with you. It's more about what it isn't than what it is. We don't know what this is.
You mean specifically?
Yeah, we don't know what these facilities are because they don't really exist.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we are very comfortable that nothing in this bill relinquishes any authority we have to regulate various manufacturing facilities. And if anything involving here requires a permit under those activities, it'll be subject to those restrictions. So this is a bill identifying a new approach to dealing with these materials, and we wanted a reference in there about our ability to inspect if there were any concerns identified. And the language that was put in the Senate, we feel very comfortable does that.
Any further questions? Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking my question, and thank you. So yes, again on page 2, going back to lines 25, 26, that area. When we're talking about pyrolysis, and it sounds to me like this is an anoxic environment that this would be taking place in. However, there is a mention that there is cooling and condensation then happening. So to me, there is a potential for there to be some sort of byproduct or something potential that might leave and head into either a stack or an environment or be recaptured some other way. It's not really elucidated here. And I guess that is my question following up from Representative Kaplan's is, in the event that there is some sort of release in some way, what do we do if that is not being complied with in a way that our regulations and the EPA's regulations state? Would the same metrics apply?
So that's why, again, we wanted to ensure our ability to inspect. If we went in there and inspected and identified something that fell under other regulatory responsibilities in terms of air emissions, et cetera, we'd follow up based on what we found. So when there wasn't anything listed in here are about our ability to go in and inspect anything that was identified as a concern to public health, and that's when we had concern. But working with the sponsors of this bill, and we appreciate it, that allowing us to make sure that that we can go in there and inspect based on our existing authorities, and if we found anything that fell under existing statutes or regulations, we would follow up accordingly. So we feel very comfortable that this will not increase any concern to public health. It's an ability to find a new approach to dealing with waste products, and we feel very comfortable we can do it in a safe way, with oversight, and existing state statutes and regulations and rules would allow us to follow up if something applicable was applied.
One more follow-up. if I
One
may.
follow-up?
And do you feel like currently you have the staff and the capacity to take on a new industry such as this, to monitor all of the same things in addition to everything else that you're charged with?
Well, so staff questions are always a difficult thing to talk with the legislature, because I'll go down the hall and they'll tell me we have too many. So, but we feel very comfortable that existing staff would be able to take this on within the existing roles we have. And if the industry grew and that changed, we'd identify that as a need when it comes up to budget and staffing. But in these early stages, we feel very comfortable that existing staff would be able to follow up, as this industry hopefully begins here in the state.
Representative Dutsey. Oh, okay. Representative Stapleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
Are these technologies in use now, any of them described in the bill, and for how long?
Yeah, they are, but I'm assuming ACC is going to testify. I'd really rather let the American Chemistry Council folks speak. They're going to be much more articulate about the status of this in this country and the other states that have implemented it. And again, but I will say this, what our staff has learned, the fact that we wouldn't be the first state moving forward and that this has been implemented in a safe way did increase our comfort level. And they'll be able to give you a better job about some of that, what is happening in other parts of the country.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yes, one.
I believe I've heard that there are somewhere between 500 and 1,500 different types of plastic resins. And I'm wondering if these processes will comprehend the breakdown of all of them, or some of them, or not many of them? How's the spectrum work on that?
Again, I think that's a great question for some of the more folks who are experts on the technology and processes we're talking about. You know, I don't want to get ahead of my skis, and I can speak to, like I said, you know, for the leadership at DS, we just wanted to make sure we felt comfortable, we weren't losing any authority. That, you know, that was our leadership's main concern, and of course always public safety. And you know, Director Wimsatt confirmed that he was very comfortable with the language and very comfortable with what's in here about the technology and if it was implemented here, and our ability to keep public safety, you know, address any public safety concerns. So for leadership, that's where we were coming from. The sponsors of the bill and the folks from ACC will be able to give you a better idea of kind of the process and the chemistry aspect of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions, we appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Next, we'll bring up John Swan from Dalton, New Hampshire, from Save Forest Lake.
Can ACC go before me,
Mr.
Chairman?
No, sir, I'm going to call you next, so go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Swan. I am the founder of Save Forest Lake, and I do apologize. I'm a little late coming to this bill because, as you know, we've been focused on a few other bills, but this was certainly one that caught my attention early on. And first off, just starting off, there's still so many questions about this bill. I mean, if we brought you a bill like this that was so discombobulated and no one speaking to testify on behalf of it could answer your questions, I mean, you would ITL or IS it, table it. I mean, and what's shocking is the fact that, and again, I'm really concerned about this bill because, first of all, we don't know anything about it. But second, it appears to be a deregulation of solid waste policy and practice and standards in New Hampshire. I mean, we're talking about a process here that is still relatively unknown. It's new. As you heard from the bill sponsor, who couldn't answer any questions about the bill, it's basically being advanced by the American Chemistry Council. So why do they want to come to New Hampshire, and why do they want to change the language on the books? What is it about the language that prevents them, any of their companies they represent, from coming into New Hampshire, finding a site, going through the permitting process? Why the change to solid waste regulations? And that's, I hope you're, I mean, I love the questions that are coming from y'all because it sounds like you're really digging into it. I would recommend that you watch the hearing video from the Senate side, just because it wasn't the same kind of hearing that we just went through with House Bill 1454 with 2 hours of grilling and counter questions. It was kind of a kumbaya for a project that, frankly, after that hearing, to me, sounded like someone's coming to town in New Hampshire and they're trying to pave the way for that project. So I think that's a question that needs to be asked maybe of the ACC or the sponsor. Is this a project that's coming to New Hampshire? And we all know the threat of PFAS proliferation and plastics in New Hampshire. We're familiar with that threat. And I mean, this bill, when I look at this language, it just screams PFAS at me in some form or fashion. We're talking about plastics. We're talking about chemistry. I know one representative mentioned it's not incineration, but as you've mentioned in discussion, there's high heat, melting, there's processes that are taking place. And again, what's at the heart of all this? PFAS. And I appreciate the fact that the waste hierarchy was mentioned, and of course, at the top is reduction. I would prefer that the bill sponsor and the ACC bring forth legislation that would suggest that they're actually going to reduce the manufacturing of these plastics that can't be recycled safely. And instead, this bill seems to be a green lighting of the production of more and more plastics in our society. And we know plastics are not good. And, you know, again, I'm not going to belabor the point. I did send you a long testimony this weekend with questions that still remain unanswered. Why can't a company come to New Hampshire with existing regulations to site a facility like this? And, you know, that's the key. But if there's no other New England state that has a facility like this, and we build it's built, not we, please, not we. If it's built centrally here in New Hampshire, is Maine going to build one? Vermont, Canada, Massachusetts? No. They're going to ship that plastic waste to New Hampshire. So again, think about what the ask is here in this bill. They're asking you to change the definition about a solid waste byproduct to something that is on the same level as virgin plastic for not recycling in terms of solid waste, but manufacturing. I mean, that's a big ask. That is the deregulation of probably the largest pain in society's butt right now is plastic waste and what to do with it. I mean, in Vermont, they're even having a problem with, you know, food depackaging and bits of the microplastics getting in the process and getting into the soil, and there's PFAS in the soil. So again, I'm sorry, I'm new to this bill. I didn't make it to the Senate hearing on it. I would really recommend that you watch the Senate hearing. I sent you the queued link, but please, does New Hampshire want to get into the plastics business? And do we want to be a magnet for out-of-state plastic waste, which is going to happen? Instead, it'll be declassified as whatever, pre-used polymer. So, thank you.
Thank you. Will you take questions?
I will certainly take questions.
Any questions for Mr. Swan? All right, seeing none, we appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And just for the benefit of all of you there, I'm trying to put the cards pro and con, so sometimes I am going to mix you guys in as we go so that it isn't all one way, then all the other, and that's why you're seeing it. So I'm trying to get a balance there. Okay, next is going to be Margaret Gorman from the American Chemistry Council. Good morning. Welcome to the E&A Committee.
Good morning, Chairman Pearl and members of the House Environment Committee. My name is Margaret Gorman. I am the Senior Director for the Northeast Region for the American Chemistry Council. We're a national trade association. We're based in Washington, D.C., and cover all different types of chemistries. We have a full plastics division. I work in our Northeast Regional Office in Albany, New York, and cover from Maine to New Jersey as well. So I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you for considering SB 367. That would essentially classify advanced recycling facilities as manufacturing facilities in the state of New Hampshire and not solid waste. This is a game changer. Right now, these facilities can take all different hard to recycle plastics. So right now, 90% of plastics are not being recycled. Those are the plastics that are in the landfills. Those can come out. They're all different types of plastics, ranging from, so even think in your home, right? Frozen vegetables, those types of bags, granola bar wrappers, detergent bottles, toothpaste tubes, lotion bottles. All those different plastics can be made and are being made into new plastics. Right now, there are existing projects out there that are working. Philadelphia cream cheese. The next time you see a Philadelphia cream cheese tub, that is coming from advanced recycling in Europe. One of our member companies, Plastic Energy, that is created out of that. Magnum ice cream tubs, that is another existing project that is working. In addition to that, there are new projects that have been announced in several areas. Who doesn't love Wendy's? Wendy's is one. They are making their new cups out of advanced recycling technologies. They're partnering with one of our member companies, LyondellBasell, to do that. Herbalescent shampoo bottles. That's another example of a new project that has been announced. What's happening in the states right now? 18 states have passed laws similar to the bill that's in front of you today. Closest to New Hampshire is Pennsylvania. Virginia was passed a couple of years ago. So in addition to the American Chemistry Council supporting this bill, several organizations throughout this country are also supporting this type of bill and the laws that are being passed, ranging from business groups to the companies that we represent, to legislators on both sides of the aisle. I have seen legislators in other states that have supported plastic bans in the past who are supporting and sponsoring this legislation that's in front of you today. They are saying this is part of the solution. This is a new technology. Actually, some of these companies, and I want to address that, have been in production for 10 years. So we have right now actually it's 10 facilities throughout the country that are taking plastic. So let me just read some examples right now. We have Altura in Akron, Ohio, 60 tons a day. Types of plastics accepted, 2s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. Braven, North Carolina, 12,000 tons a year. They're taking 2s, 4s, 5s, 6s, and 6s. Brightmark, Ashley, Indiana, 1,000 tons a year of plastics they are currently taking right now. This is not a false statement. This is actually happening. And those companies want to come to the Northeast. They want to invest in the Northeast because they see themselves as part of the solution as well. So right now, there are no facilities that are set up in the Northeast. Reclassifying them as manufacturing facilities is properly classifying them because they're making new products. They're not making solid waste. So that's why, we thank DES for working with us on making sure that they are properly regulated and supporting that as well. Additional states in the Northeast that have introduced legislation: New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, both sides of the aisle that are supporting this type of legislation. So in conclusion, I just wanted to, before, I'm also available for questions, the other side and the arguments that you're hearing on the other side. Incineration. It's not incineration. They are not burning plastics. It is a degree issue. Incineration is 1,500 degrees Celsius. Melting at a thermal process is 500 to 800. The emission rate, there's been a recent study, it's lower than a college campus and hospitals. The emission rates are not that high. They're also subject right now, federal law sets health and safety standards for air emissions, which facilities must adhere and report to. They're subject to fines, permitting revocations, and closure if they exceed air emission limits. So they're not asking to be exempted from being, subject to regulation. They're just asking to be reclassified properly because they are making new products. Advanced recycling facilities are not producers of any significant amount of hazardous waste, especially, compared to other manufacturing processes. So again, they're not burning during advanced recycling. They're using thermal energy, heat, but take place in the absence of oxygen, so there's little to no combustion. So I want to make sure to address that because you're going to hear that it's incineration and it's 100% not accurate. It's not true. The emission rate, again, is lower than a college campus or a hospital. So I thank all of you for listening to me today and considering this legislation, and we're very excited to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? I kind of had an idea there might be.
Yes.
Representative Bixby.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. So I actually have several questions, but I'll start with one. You mentioned that that there are various new products that are that basically the plastic is melted down into constituent chemicals, and then new products are made. Is that all happening in the same facility? In other words, does the pyrolysis or gasolysis or solvolysis happen in the facility? Those chemicals, the short chains or monomers, et cetera, are the result of the of that pyrolysis, are those then in that same facility turned into the new lid, the new bottles for herbal essence, or is the product there shipped to a different facility where where the final product is made?
That's a great question, and the answer is both. It can be melted into a fuel at one facility, or it can be transferred into a product in that same facility as well. So there's, different facilities are doing different types of recycling, and that is trending again towards new products.
Okay.
And I just stop for a second because our technical expert actually isn't here today, so if there's something I can't answer, we'll certainly, as you've talked to Craig Cookson, who's my colleague, and he is the Director of Plastic Sustainability, we'll certainly get those questions that we can get answered for you.
Okay.
So I'm going to interrupt for just a second. I have every intention of scheduling a work session on this bill, and since we don't have necessarily all of the technical experts here today, maybe I might just say to the committee, why don't we save some of these really technical questions for when we can have the proper folks to answer them in our work session, and just so that we're not getting bogged down on a lot of the questions that we can't answer today, if that would be acceptable.
Okay, that would be fine, and I will save the you just cover the higher level questions here.
Thank you.
And one of them, you mentioned fuel, and one of the I did a little bit of reading about pyrolysis, et cetera, and one of the uses that pyrolysis liquids are sometimes put to is as diesel fuel or other sorts of fuel for vehicles or that sort of thing. Is that the sort of thing that these plants would be producing if one were to come to New Hampshire?
It could be, and it used to be, but that's not the trend that we're seeing now. So a lot what we're seeing now are these new products that I mentioned and the new projects that have been announced. And I didn't even cover all of them, ranging from the Wendy's project to herbal essence. So yes, it beginning did start that way, and now it is trending to new products. And yes, they certainly could do that, but what we're seeing and what companies are doing now is going into new products.
And,
One more follow-up?
And just a sort of a business model question. So obviously there's a lot of energy input, there's a lot of infrastructure input in terms of collecting all the plastics, so it sounds kind of expensive. Would directing these towards making new products as opposed to diesel fuel for burning be does that improve the balance sheet for doing this sort of project?
It would certainly help the balance sheet of New Hampshire economically, for sure. The companies that are coming in are not asking for state subsidies or tax money. So the economic output of what is coming out of these companies is millions of dollars. We could certainly look at New Hampshire, but we've done analysis, for example, on the state of New York, $500 million a year in economic output. So it's certainly, I think, in addition to the benefits of recycling the plastics into new plastics, what a great economic output for the state of New Hampshire as well on top of that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Kennedy.
My question just got answered. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Murray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking my question. Thank you for taking my question. So one question I do have is with regard to plastics that might come in that are multi-layered, that have non-stick coatings of any kind, or that kind of thing that might then get melted down into a new product. What, if any, duty do we have to let folks know that potentially those products are getting commingled together and made into something new? And are those coatings then transferred into the newer products that you're mentioning?
So the products that are coming in that are being melted down can be combined. But with that, let me address if there's other chemistries in that products, those chemistries are not going into the emissions, right? For example, as well, they have to meet certain specifications for these manufacturing facilities. And again, that's something Craig can discuss more in the work session. But they're also subject, again, to federal standards and emission rates and other chemistries of concern that you're looking at. I think what you're getting at into the emission it would not be going into the emissions at all. And they are certainly subject to inspections and their own requirements.
Thank you.
Representative Bixby, if you want to turn your mic off.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Representative Kaplan.
Thanks for taking my question. I recognize that you're not a technical expert, and so I'm going to try to keep it simple. But this is not incineration, granted. but
Correct.
Is it not a fact that the emissions and the byproduct, the waste byproduct, would contain toxic substances, such as dioxins and furans and heavy metals?
So the emission rates are lower or the same as a college campus or hospital.
But they would contain levels of those toxic
That's something I'd
substances.
have to have Craig can certainly go into that.
Because those
but-
substances are not safe at any
But when you say toxic substance, can you, what specific chemistries are you referring, are you PFAS? Or is that what you're?
I'm talking more about dioxins and furans and heavy metals, which is the stuff that usually comes out when you burn plastics.
If
I
it
recognize
was,
this isn't incineration, but the emissions still do contain levels of those contaminants. Yes or no?
that's something that I would have to have Craig. Certainly, we can get into more detail on that. But the emissions do not have other chemistries in them. As I've said, I mean, they're low. There have been studies out there. We can certainly talk more about that as we get into the work session, but it's.
Follow-up question?
Sure, and I just want to remind you, Representative, we're not interrogating a witness here, so
No, I
let's
just
keep
wanna-
our questions
I just want to
friendly.
be clear for the public.
Thank
and
you, I appreciate
public
that.
record. Follow-up question?
Go
if I
ahead.
may? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you familiar with the Saint-Gobain plant in Merrimack and the PFAS?
I am. They're not a member of ACC, but I am familiar with the plant and the issue here, yes.
I mean, that's something that we're still dealing with in New Hampshire. That was really a product of lax enforcement and unforeseen consequences of the chemical industry. So would you agree that it might be wise for us to not jump into something like this with 2 feet and unaware of the potential downside that is something that's possibly huge?
So these facilities have been in existence for 10 years, and not once have these facilities been subject to any sort of issues with emissions of toxins. They are subject to enforcement by the federal government. They are subject to the Clean Water Act. They are subject to the Clean Air Act. They're not looking for an exemption from any sort of other statutes. They're just looking to be classified properly. And I think this is a great time to say, we have an actual video, a great video, and looking inside of one of these companies and what they're doing. So we'll make sure to send that to you after. But they're different facilities. I mean, this is a facility that takes plastics and makes them into new plastics. So there's been a lot of successful projects out there.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to ask you a question myself. Are there any of these facilities being proposed in the New England states currently? Do you know of any that are on, that are seeking a permit to operate?
Not yet. They're in the Northeast. There have not been any states yet that have reclassified these facilities. So the closest right now is Ohio. There is an existing facility set up in Ohio already, but we do know that companies are looking to come here and invest in the Northeast.
And would that purpose be so that they're closer to the source of the product?
Correct.
Okay. Representative Dutsey.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. Am I to believe that any kind of plastics can go into this process? For example, if I go to Christmas tree shop and I see a plastic Adirondack chair, when that breaks, that can go into this process. Plastic toys can go into this process. Am I correct in that?
It's all different hard to recycle plastics, but the ones that we're hearing the most that they're taking are your harder to recycle, like your granola bar wrappers, for example, and lotion bottles. Polypropylene is a higher rate. So it really depends on the commodities. But yes, they can take all hard to recycle plastics. I don't have the amount of chairs that they're taking specifically, but it would depend on the facility and what the outcome that they would be looking at.
Follow-up?
Sure.
So what happens to my plastic detergent bottle now? Because it was my understanding that it was getting recycled. That's not true?
What I can answer is that 90% of plastics right now are not being recycled, and these facilities can take detergent bottles and recycle them into new ones.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Kennedy.
Thank you for taking my question. You mentioned earlier the revenue that you guys have mapped out to come towards states. Is there also a tax reduction? Have you guys looked into any of that other than just the revenue? Is there a pathway, just like how we bring in trash from other states into our landfills, the trafficking of that material over the border to come into a facility like this on our state, would that give us tax relief other than just an income to the state?
That's a good question. I know our facilities right now are privately investing in other states, so they're not looking for tax breaks. Whether or not that would happen in New Hampshire, it's a question I can't answer right now, but they're certainly, when they're looking to come into the states, they're not looking for a state to give them a tax break. They're just looking to privately invest.
Follow up?
What about them also contributing to the state so we get a tax deduction? So it can go into helping pay for schools, pay for stuff like that.
That's something that it was a private company that would be up to the company, I think, in the state. Once they decide to come and invest, it would be a private, decision between the company and the state and how they want to work that.
Representative Stapleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. In a metals process, high melt, there's often slag and dross that's problematic. But in these lower temperatures, dealing with the plastics and resins, is there not much of that sort of thing because you're melting to reform?
That is a question I can have Craig address more during the work session, but I know this has come up, and it's typically 80% of the plastics that are recovered.
Follow up?
Sure.
One of the big problems we have are the blades from windmill generation for the power. And I understand they're burying these things because they can't process them for any given use at this point. Will any of the processes here enable handling of these sort of things?
Handling of the windmills?
Windmill blades.
That I don't know. It would depend on what the blades are made out of and if it's plastic that's included. So it's certainly maybe a question for the work session
Sure. So
as
maybe
well.
maybe we can save some of these really technical questions for the work
Yeah,
session.
that may be a fiberglass component as well as poly.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Representative
Thank you.
Bixby.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. So I have a couple of things that I'm trying to get my head around here. One is, at what point does the classification change from waste to feedstock? So, for instance, when is it a matter of when it is collected from wherever it gets collected, whether it's a municipality has a curbside or a waste transfer station? Does it at that point cease to be solid waste, or is it when it enters the factory? And what if there is not enough capacity at the factory to handle the amount that's coming in?
So that is definitely a technical question. I think I'm going to have to defer for Craig for the work session on the technicalities of the feedstock
Okay. And then let me go for a higher, what I hope is not a technical question, which is, why is it that, what is it about it being regulated as manufacturing rather than, what is it about it being regulated as solid waste right now that prevents someone from just doing it?
that prevents a company from coming in
Yeah.
because they're not being properly classified, because the trends are they're making new products. And in my understanding, solid waste is not considered an actual product that's in front of you. So their trend is making plastics into new plastics, and they just want to be classified correctly. And that's what 18 states have done. We had 2 states in 24 hours the other day that just enacted the same law, and 4 other states in the Northeast that are very interested in that, because it's just changing so much with what the new products are being made into.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, are there specific regulatory things that you have to deal with as a solid waste facility that get in the way of being a manufacturer, or certain things that you have to deal with as a manufacturer that would give you an advantage if you weren't called solid waste?
I think it's on the classification. I can certainly have Craig address that more, but if they're not a solid waste facility, why should they have to come in and be permitted as a solid waste facility? I mean, if they're making new products, they should be able to be classified properly.
Right. I'm
Right?
just trying to figure out if, what the real impediment is.
Because they're still subject to permitting and DES coming in and audits and everything else. So they're not looking to get out of anything. They're just looking to make sure they're classified correctly.
Okay, so that they would be subject to the right sorts of.
Correct.
Regulation. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
All right, so I'm going to ask the committee, if you don't have any questions that are really just general, if they're real technical, can we please hold them for the work group? Because we're going to be here all afternoon otherwise. And I think we don't have the right person necessarily in front of us, as she stated, to answer the real technical questions. So Representative Dutzy?
Thank you. I don't think this is technical. Yeah, my understanding from a study is that in 2018, we recycled 3 million tons of plastic, but we produced 35 million tons of plastic. Can you give me any idea of what you think the throughput would be, kind of an average throughput you would see on an annual basis for this facility?
So if I could ask what is the study that you're referring to?
I don't know. It was a webinar I didn't put down the thing.
Okay.
It just said there, yeah, and it kind of goes along with you're saying
Yes.
90% aren't
Correct. We're saying the
recycled.
same
Right.
thing. So you
Yeah.
said 3 million tons compared to 30 million. So it's about 90% that are
it's
not
about
being
right,
recycled.
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, so what would be the kind of the expected or average throughput of a facility in New Hampshire? What do you think it would be?
We could definitely drill that down for New Hampshire, but I know New York, if 25% of plastics of those hard to recycle, were recycled annually, 800,000 tons a year that would be recycled.
York,
That's New York, so we would have to do a comparable to New Hampshire. But certainly, you're looking at tons and tons and tons.
And just one follow-up that.
I mean, even based on the examples I provided in the other states and what the sites are currently doing right now.
I caught a few of them, but okay. And the last thing, and again, it was from this webinar, and basically it said that corporate sustainability goals will pay more for recycled resins rather than virgin resins. And so would the resins coming out of these facilities be considered recycled or not because of this solid waste facilities management type of thing?
Without
What do
the
you think?
webinar, understanding the webinar
Yeah.
that although I think I
Yeah.
have an idea, but it would be taking virgin resins as well. If that answers the question. I mean, it would go into the.
Representative Kaplan?
Yeah, I hope this is a pertinent question. It references a couple of things that you mentioned. The first one was the economic benefits to the state. I'm assuming you're talking about the jobs
Sure.
available. So say there was one of these facilities built in New Hampshire. How many jobs are we actually talking about?
So it depends on the size. So in some states, I know there's over 100 jobs. Some
I mean,
have about
we're-
50. It just
you
depends.
aware that there's like a 5% or less unemployment rate right now? So it's a buyer's market for jobs. So I'm assuming you're talking about good jobs, like plant managers, chemical engineers, those kind of jobs. How many of those kind of jobs are we talking about?
Probably on the plant manager, well, you would have a plant manager, but on different, you need chemical engineers, but then you've got construction jobs on top of that, right? So you're talking good salary paid jobs, you're talking all around the spectrum.
How many jobs would you say?
I don't have a specific amount because the company's not in New Hampshire yet, so I can tell you what we've done in other states and what we'd be looking at, but until they're set up, I don't have an exact on how many jobs would be here specifically.
I think we're going to back off on this line just a little bit. We're getting really nitty gritty, and we're going to save that for the work session. Any other questions that are not real technical like that? All right, seeing none, I appreciate you coming in and giving us testimony and the information you've provided.
Thank you, and thank
Thank
you
you.
for considering the bill and for your time today.
Okay, next we're going to call on John Tuthill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is John Tuthill. I live in Ackworth, Sullivan County, former member of the E&A committee. I watched the tape of the Senate hearing. This is a bill actually we'd flagged when it was still an LSR, and we saw that it was dealing with something called advanced recycling that looked pretty positive and innocuous. And unfortunately, we got sort of tied up with some other solid waste issues this year, and this one dropped off my radar until it got to the Senate, where it flew through and was not getting the sort of good questions that this committee has been posing today. Sullivan County, we've already been through this. We saw trade groups and an industry come into our region with a proposal for some advanced technology to deal with waste materials and resources. A lot of promises were made. The legislature did provide subsidies, and I think there's the potential for state subsidies in this case under existing law. This is a very, very broad bill, and it's highly technical. It's surprising to me when the prime sponsor arrives and suggests that he would like to defer questions to the organization which asked him to bring this legislation forward, saying that they will be in a better position to answer questions, particularly technical questions. Clearly, this organization was not prepared for today's hearings. I would like to strongly urge that rather than going to a work session based on what you've seen today and upon review of the Senate audio tape back in February 8th, that you consider finding this ITL right now. We're not ready for this. New Hampshire does not have the regulatory framework or the rules in place to deal with this emerging industry. As I say, it's very broad. You're dealing with all sorts of processes. The numbers that were cited earlier in testimony about the volumes of material being processed are minute compared to the amounts of plastic that are now moving through our consumer society. Really, this looks to me like more of what the now defunct American Plastics Council did for many years, which was to put up the appearance that the plastics industry and the companies providing their feedstocks were effectively recycling, when in fact, as was pointed out also in earlier testimony, the amount of recycling going on of plastic products is negligible. There are a couple of sorts of plastics. If you are controlling the resin quality, as was mentioned earlier, this would be far easier. They're beginning to deal with this in Europe, but you need to be regulating the manufacturers and the feedstocks carefully so that recycling and reuse becomes possible. Our issue here really is about reduction in these materials, and the legislature has looked at bills dealing with things like container deposit, which would dramatically reduce the amount of plastics moving towards the disposal streams and would divert them into effective reuse. Single-use plastics have been discussed by the legislature in recent years. Haven't seen much movement on that, but that's another way to start getting reductions. And I think that's where the focus ought to be, rather than thinking you can come in with these energy-intensive technologies dealing with what are likely to be relatively contaminated waste streams, simply because when you're dealing with waste, it's always looking for a place to go, and it's looking at what's the cheapest place to go. And there's one implication of this proposed legislation which suggests that as soon as a truckload of material drives through the gate, that it is now deemed to be a non-waste and no longer presents any sort of contamination issue. So I think it's important that DES continue to have complete regulatory authority over these feedstocks so they do not become used as a place to make hard to manage and contaminated materials disappear, even if it is disappearing into an industrial process, which will have some pollution control. But there are emissions. You also have solid waste coming out the back end, not slag necessarily, sometimes referred to as char, but a lot of plastics have stabilizers and colorants in them. You're going to be finding PFAS in these streams, whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it waste or not. Heavy metals are in plastic for stabilizers. You're using metals also for colorants, which is what makes detergent bottles jump off the shelf. This stuff is not innocuous, and we need to be regulating it intelligently and carefully. I strongly urge you to say, this is too complex, this is far too broad. It's going to require at least another year if the state truly wants to open its door to this emerging industry. There have already been efforts in New Hampshire to crack the door open. I think the senator who proposed legislation in 2016 said, well, we want to start small. And they did, and we now have some regulations in RSA 125C, air regulations, which would be over in SciTech, but They did pass legislation supporting pyrolysis, which is one of the technologies discussed in this bill. DES went ahead and adopted rules for the feedstock, which is exactly what needs to happen here. DES does have to be involved upfront, making sure that these feedstocks are not contaminated or not increasing risk to public health and the environment. Unfortunately, the rules DES did adopt for pyrolysis, and the vendor that was interested in this never did show up in the state. It was a Canadian company, and it was clearly a bill designed to encourage that investment. It hasn't happened. But the standards that were set in the rules were just extraordinary in the levels of lead, for example, that were permitted. This wasn't plastics in this case. This was construction and demolition debris. They were going to allow 10% by weight of what are called fines, which is the particles that fall out of a processing facility for construction and demolition debris. In this case, they were looking to make fuel. But it's the same problem. You need to be getting up as close to the source of the production of hazardous materials as you can and start regulating it there, and not simply create a doorway through which you can pass material and then say, well, it's no longer of concern from an environmental or a public health perspective. I really urge you, as somebody who testified earlier did, that you do take the time to look at that Senate hearing from February 8th. Just astonishing. The lack of sort of thought and even interest, or the lack of questions that were asked. I mean, I really felt the lobbyists who had come in for the organization promoting this bill. I mean, he must not have been able to believe his eyes, the reception he was getting, and yet the sponsors, or at least those that were on the committee that was hearing the bill, did not seem to have a firm grasp of what was in the bill. And even the representative for the organization today, I think, really did not provide this committee with enough information to even go forward considering the bill. I'll leave it at that. There's a lot to say on this, but I really urge you to be very careful before you open this door. As I say, in Sullivan County, we did see the legislature invite an industry into the state back in the 80s, and I keep coming before this committee and others because we in Sullivan County paid a very, very high price for decisions that were made here to promote private investment in technologies where, in fact, the real effort, I believe, in managing waste is got to be around education, behavior, and frankly, beginning to limit some of the materials that are routinely used in consumer products. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuthill. Any questions? Seeing none, we appreciate you coming in today. Next, we will call up Heidi Tremaro from CLF. Sorry if I didn't get the last name right.
Hi. Heidi Tremarco.
Tremarco, okay.
Conservation Law Foundation.
My apologies.
I have written marks. Hi.
Welcome to the E&A.
Hello. So I am sending around the written remarks, but I believe they were also emailed to the committee on April 1st from my colleague Peter Blair. And so CLF is here to oppose this bill, which is really, the name advanced recycling should really be seen for what it is, which is a greenwashing description of this bill. You've heard today it described as a high heat thermal process. It is a burning of plastics. And it is not recycling. In fact, you've been told it's not recycling. They want it to be called manufacturing. So this is not an advanced recycling bill, despite the name. CLF supports recycling, and you've heard today there's many things we need to do to reduce the amount of plastics that are going into our landfills. And there are solutions out there. We'd love for the committee to consider those. There's composting, extended producer responsibility, source reduction, there's a bottle bill. There's a lot of things that can be done that we know work. This is not one of them. There's a lot of unknown with this bill, as you've heard today. And there's no reason why this technology should be deregulated by the state. We weren't able to hear any reason really articulated why this process can't go forward under the current regulations and why the American Chemistry Council is pushing for deregulation of this plastics. And we should be really wary of that. This is a dangerous process with a lot of environmental externalities, and we have these documented in our comments. But just to call out part of them, like traditional waste incineration, this process creates a significant environmental harm. They emit just as much carbon dioxide as waste incinerators. And they emit air emissions that contain heavy metals like lead and mercury, as well as other toxics. They can include PCBs, hydrogen cyanide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen, sulfur dioxides. This is not it is not a clean process. There's a lot of environmental externalities with this burning of plastic. And as you've heard today, no other New England states are doing this, and specifically, similar bills to deregulate this burning of plastic under the guise of advanced recycling has been brought forward and rejected in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. So the other New England states are saying, we don't want this dirty process in our state. And what will happen if New Hampshire does this deregulation is you will see these wastes being sent to New Hampshire. We already import 50% of our waste that goes into our landfills from out of state. New Hampshire does not want to keep attracting the waste from the rest of New England. And finally, as we look at this new or emerging technology, and we look at all these questions that came up today that we keep saying, are really technical questions that need to be considered further. New Hampshire has a solid waste working group that is looking at these issues and can specifically address. This bill came up at the last meeting of New Hampshire Solid Waste Working Group, and we know that the State Department of Environmental Services is updating the state solid waste plan. Currently, we're operating under a plan that the state produced in 2003, and DES was supposed to update that plan every 6 years, and they haven't done so. Now, they tell us that we are on the cusp of a new plan, that a new plan is coming out in October. Director Wimsatt testified to that in previous hearings in the past couple weeks. So DES says that we're going to have a new state solid waste plan in October. And so I respectfully say that while we await that new plan, it is inexpedient to move forward on this bill and to deregulate this burning of plastics. And so we suggest that the committee move the bill as inexpedient to legislate. I can take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Bixby.
Yeah, so you referenced extended producer responsibility as one alternative for dealing with plastics. So if an industry takes back their single-use plastics after they're being used, what do they do with them then?
Well, there's a myriad of things the industry could do with them. I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, so I guess they're going. If the industry takes back their single-use plastics, they're going to need to have some mechanism for breaking those down into something that is once again usable. And I'm wondering if pyrolysis, which does in fact not use oxygen and therefore does not create carbon dioxide, if pyrolysis is taken off the table, then how are they going to convert those single-use plastics, which are generally in the category of difficult to deal with plastics? How are they going to manage to turn those into something useful?
Well, certainly, there's nothing, if this bill fails to go forward, that doesn't mean pyrolysis is taken off the table for all. What this does is it deregulates these plastic feedstock as solid waste. So it doesn't mean that that technology can't be explored further, and I think it should be explored further by the working group and by DES, and the experts should weigh in on the viability of that process before we deregulate it.
Follow-up?
So if this process is largely an industrial manufacturing process, would it make more sense to have it regulated under the regulations that cover manufacturers rather than solid waste facilities?
I don't think, so the question is, would it make more sense to regulate as manufacturing?
Yes.
I mean, currently, this is waste that goes into the feedstock. And so
I'm sorry, I don't think I'm following the
Okay,
question.
so the material that is going into these plants could either be classified as solid waste and would have one set of regulations applied to it, such as keeping rats out, or it could be treated as a raw material for a manufacturing process, and that manufacturing process would have regulations that deal with things like clean air, both at the federal and state level, clean water, state and federal level, and the disposal of what would be the char or slag or whatever that is that 20% that was referenced as not being reusable. So would it make more sense to regulate this under manufacturing rules rather than solid waste rules?
I'm hesitant to say to regulate this because I don't think the bill is clear what falls into which category and when, as you asked earlier, when the waste transitions from being waste to this feedstock. And so I think this is just another unknown. You know, we have current regulations in place and there's no reason to waive them and deregulate. But I can I can take that question back as well and just, provide more information. You know, I can try to see if I can get a more detailed answer. But right now, I think it's too undefined.
Okay, follow up?
Sure, one more?
So I think that one thing that I'd like to have answered in that follow-up is what sorts of regulations do not yet exist for the manufacturing processes involved in pyrolysis and advanced recycling that would need to be in place in order to provide proper safeguards.
What sorts of regulations do not yet exist in regards to pyrolysis?
That need to be in
That
place
should-
in
that
order to
should-
make it safe.
Okay, I will take that question back.
Thank you.
Get a response to you.
Any further questions? Representative Kennedy.
Thank you for taking my question. DES has stated that they are comfortable with this language. Why do you disagree with the fact that they are comfortable with the language if they have worked with the Senate on it and this is now what we have in front of us?
I can't explain why DES says they're comfortable deregulating this waste, but it raises a red flag to me that DES is willing to waive that authority and to weaken, as you heard before, the language has been weakened as it went through the Senate, and I think that is really concerning. And DES, they weren't able to provide any reason why the waste should be deregulated and why this process should be deregulated. And so it's hard to explain why they're taking that position.
So I'm not going to speak for DES specifically, but as you are aware, I am the representative for the House on the Solid Waste Working Group, and this bill did come up. And what Director Wimsatt certainly conveyed to the working group was that they were comfortable that the wording within the bill gave them the power to, or the authority, excuse me, to go in and inspect these facilities. And one of their major concerns was in the event that a facility failed and there was still some of this solid waste that had not been processed on site, would they have the ability to go in and manage and regulate the appropriate dispersal of things that were still might be considered solid waste within that facility? So that was one of the things that Director Wimsatt touched on directly. Go ahead if you want to.
Right, and I think DES needs to do the planning work first, and they're engaged in that planning, and we're told it's coming right now. So this is putting the cart before the horse. You know, this is like issuing landfill permits, relying on an outdated solid waste plan. We need to do the planning first and decide what direction the state wants to go before we start deregulating certain procedures.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. We appreciate you coming in. Okay, next we'll call on, I believe it's Nancy Morrison. I'm sorry if I'm trying to read the writing here. Hopefully I got it right.
I didn't have my glasses.
That's okay.
My glasses on, so it was a little rough.
Thank you. Welcome to E&A.
I'm sorry?
I said, welcome to E&A. Go ahead, the
Thank
floor is
you.
yours.
Thank you for listening to me today. I'm Nancy Morrison from Mount Vernon, New Hampshire. I'll be very brief because mostly the things I would like to say have been said. And I'm not as eloquent a speaker as some of the ones you've heard today, but I am here to give an opinion as a citizen that New Hampshire and the world needs less plastic, not creating more from old plastic that is highly energy intensive to create, actually 87 times higher than the energy it would give if it was made into fuel, and creates often inferior products and adds pollution to our world in the form of dioxins, PFAS, and metals. I would encourage all of you to take this very, very slowly, as has been mentioned. This industry is relatively new, and states have adopted it, but they've struggled with it. And from what I have read and researched, there has been moderate success at best. I encourage all of you to Google a report by Reuters in November of last year, 2021, and I think it will help you to balance some of the things you heard from the ACC in order to get two sides to the coin. It's an excellent article. But basically, I believe we are swapping pollution from the ground to the air, and that trading one evil for another is where this would be at right now. I feel like it's just too early to take this on, and more research needs to be done, and a study group is a great idea for you folks. But plastic reduction is the answer, and with respect to Representative Avard, advanced recycling is a plan, but it's a bad plan right now for New Hampshire. So with that, I thank you for listening to me.
Will you take questions?
Oh,
And are there any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, I guess you're off the hook. Thank you for coming in. All right, I'm on my last card. If there's anyone else who wants to speak, get a card in quickly, because I'm going to close right after this if I don't have any more. Kirsten Koch from the BIA. Thank you for coming in. Welcome to the Environment and Ag Committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kirsten Koch, and I'm the Director of Public Policy for the Business and Industry Association, also known as BIA. I'm here today to express BIA's support for Senate Bill 367. This bill furthers environmental sustainability and brings economic benefits to New Hampshire. We believe that this bill furthers the state's solid waste management goals by preventing many traditionally hard-to-recycle plastics from going into New Hampshire landfills. Instead, these advanced recycling facilities can manufacture these products into a variety of reusable materials. We believe it's time to welcome these manufacturers with this technology into New Hampshire in order to divert solid waste from landfills and begin developing a more robust recycling market in New England. Senate Bill 367 also encourages advanced recycling facilities to come to New Hampshire for business, ultimately bringing more jobs to the local economy on a variety of levels. This bill provides regulatory certainty for advanced recycling facilities. And the main function of these facilities is to manufacture new materials, not to manage the disposal of waste. New Hampshire should welcome sustainable business, and we believe that these facilities should be regulated as what they are, which is manufacturers. We respectfully request this committee to pass Senate Bill 367 because it would further environmental sustainability and increase economic opportunities for the state of New Hampshire. Thank you for your consideration, and I'd be glad to try to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Sorry about getting your last name wrong.
It's okay.
Any questions from the committee? Representative Dutsey.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. What professionals does the BIA have on its staff to be able to understand the environmental impact of this bill?
So for staff, I mean, for these issues, we consult with our members and our experts, and so we've been consulting with chemistry experts in order to further understand this bill. That's part of our membership. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else that wants to testify on this before I close out? Yes, sir. You'll have to state your name, and I'm going to ask you to fill out a pink card when
Yes,
you're
sir,
done.
I will. Thank you, Chairman Pearl. I had planned not to speak to this because frankly, I don't know enough about it. The more I've listened to it today.
Could you state your name, sir?
Excuse me. My name is Fred Anderson. I'm from Whitefield. We sort our trash, we recycle, we compost. I'm married to a woman who is a plastic Nazi. I was born before plastic. I know what it means to live in a world without plastic, and frankly, we can. And frankly, we probably can live there better. But when I hear, oh, we can turn it from fuel, we can turn it into products, it sounds like a dream. It sounds like the absolute solution. The devil is in the details, friends. So I simply urge you, as the responsible people you are on either side of the aisle here, we learned that from you in terms of other things in the work we've done with you. Take your time. What's the rush? If this can be done, improve it and let's go for it. We'll all benefit. But for heaven's sakes, don't make a mistake that's going to put more stuff in the air that's going to have to be dealt with one way or another, and we will not benefit from it. So, as I said, I didn't plan to say anything to you, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else that wishes to speak? All right, seeing none, I'm going to read the blue sheet. So we have 10 folks signed in on the blue sheet, all opposed. And give me a second, I'm going to get the online one. There's 11 online, there's 11 in support, and 142 in opposition. With that, I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 367. So I will schedule a work session on this at some point. We got to figure that out and iron out when it'll be. But we'll have to keep your eye on the calendar, and we'll get something designed. For the committee, benefit of the committee, we will be having hearings next Tuesday on April 12th. And we'll also have a presentation scheduled on that day beginning at 9 a.m. So, but keep your eye on the calendar. I will get all that together and we'll get it out to you. So, beyond that, anything else from the committee before I close? Oh, Representative Bixby.
Just want to remind the chair that in addition to having the hearings next Tuesday, because we are hearing a couple early bills, there will also be execs on those.
There will be. Thank you for reminding me of that. That was the other point. We will be doing some exec work next week because we were given 2 early bills rather late over the weekend, and I was not able to get them into this week's hearings, so we're going to have to hear them and exec them next Tuesday. So for the benefit of the committee, I want to give you a heads up that that's coming. Anything further that I've forgotten? I don't think so. All right. With that, we will adjourn for today. Thank you.